infrastructure here in South Carolina to tackling human trafficking? I talk one-on-one with State Representative Spencer Wetmore of South Carolina House District 115 for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. State Representative Spencer Wetmore, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Quintin, it's always a pleasure, even though you ask the hard questions. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate it greatly. Needless to say, you are the state representative for South Carolina House District 115, which covers James Island, Lower Johns Island, Folly Beach, Seabrook, and of course, Kiowa. So tell me, State Representative, what's new, what's now with House District 115?
Yeah, so, I think what everybody's talking about right now is infrastructure. Obviously, we had the big debate over the sales tax referendum. I hope, the county council can work on that in a way that doesn't include 526 going forward, but it can't be on our local governments, only our local governments to fund infrastructure. And so one of my priorities this year is ensuring that we can deliver as much state and hopefully pass through federal funding as possible. So I've been working on a bill about infrastructure. I know that through the budget process, we'll talk a lot about funding for DOT, but that is the hot topic, in my opinion, and what I'm hearing in my district for sure. Roads, bridges, drainage, sewer, all the things.
So in your particular district, how many bridges and sewers need to be actually replaced or repaired right now?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but I know, one of the projects and priorities for us has been the cleanup of James Island Creek, which has been a polluted waterway for a long time. And the trace bacteria testing that we did indicated that unfortunately it was human bacteria that was causing the pollution there, which of course comes from failing septic systems. So one of the priorities has been actually extending the sewer line, not so much replacing old lines, but just creating new tap-ins, as they're called. So I'm actually going to a groundbreaking today for a new one over in Clark Point. And so, we were able to bring home $2 million plus another $7 million in funding to my district for that project. So those are the kinds of things, but I don't know exactly, how many. I think it's probably more about congestion alleviation. So maybe road widening projects or intersection projects rather than any specific number of new or replaced things. But certainly all of the above is the answer.
Yes, ma'am. So let me go right there to James Island. I have to go over there later today for another interview with the folks at Ripe Juice Bar right there on Folly Road. Yeah, so we'll get some smoothies going, I guess. But what exactly are those areas where there need to be road widening in and around James Island?
So, James Island, I think one of the biggest needs, in my opinion, is a multi-use or pedestrian path along Folly Road. In my mind, that's the biggest need on James Island right now. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other needs. There are, there've been, we've got a ton of drainage issues, especially over near Central Park Road. The bridge on Central Park floods over. We've got an upcoming project in partnership with Charleston County. Again, that's where my political juice goes, right? I brought $1 million home for that project last year. So, really focused on drainage projects and road lifting on Central Park is going to have to be a part of that. So those are the two priority areas in my mind right now. I think everybody can sort of agree, unfortunately, that Johns Island probably is maybe even in worse shape when it comes to congestion and traffic congestion. And so I think, the solutions there, Maybank Highway, what are we doing, getting onto the bridge? What are we doing at that intersection at River? Getting that main flyover going with Charleston County. So those are the kinds of projects right now that I'm trying to make sure that it doesn't get held up from permitting. Just last week I was on the phone with DOT trying to make sure that we got the permit for the Central Park Road project. So, all these things, they don't just happen. They happen because people like staff members from the county and DOT and elected officials come together and get permits and funding and design work done. And so, I'll continue to keep working on that everywhere that needs it.
Yes, ma'am. And so, okay, with those particular projects, particularly on Central Park Road, and of course, the main road flyover, I should say, and I should know about that. But How long is that permitting taking place for those particular projects?
Central Park has taken a really long time, unfortunately,
Mm,
because of the wetlands around
right.
there. So that requires a higher level of permitting. And so unfortunately, that's taken quite some time, although the finish line is in sight. So, unfortunately, that's taken over, gosh, almost 2 years at this point. Now,
Mm,
some of that's design work, and they do like a certain level. Sorry, I'm not exactly positive of the percentages, but they do like a certain percent of the design. They
right.
get DOT's feedback. They do another certain percent. So some of that's back and forth with
Or
design too. But because it's so there's like coastal zone consistency permits, which are state level, and then there's federal permits because of the wetlands. So that one has been really tricky because if you think about kind of where it is and why it's flooding, it's because it's surrounded by marsh on all sides. So that one has been especially difficult. Now the main road flyover, um, you know, you probably covered this in some of your other interviews, but there was apparently Charleston County DOT really doesn't accept maintenance anymore on county projects. Um, I think we can all appreciate the fact that DOT has a hard time maintaining the existing roads that they do have, and so I can appreciate, while I'm not thrilled about it, I can appreciate their position that they're not going to accept new maintenance right now. But then the county also wasn't willing to accept maintenance on that. And so my understanding is that's how the pedestrian path was eliminated from that project. I hope that there can be some, we've advocated to bring that back, or to at least make it an option as maybe the second phase of that project. But um, you know, that back and forth about right of way, all of that is sort of what I'm including when I say permitting. And
right.
so that whole thing has taken, again, maybe a year and a half to 2 years. So,
With that maintenance, well, who actually takes over that maintenance for the main road flyover now that DOT can't take care of that?
well, so I think the way it works is that D still takes over maintenance for the road itself. So it
Mm,
would still be a DOT road.
sure.
It's a question of when you add amenities like a pedestrian
Oh yeah.
path, will the local government take over that
Mm,
maintenance? And in this case, the answer was apparently no.
right.
But unfortunately, I'm sorry to say I don't know exactly the specifics of what the
Right.
negotiation entailed
Sure.
there.
Sure.
A lot of that, because it's a county-led project, a lot of that I sort of tried to,
Stay back.
appreciate their staffing
Right.
limitations as well. So,
Oh, sure, absolutely. So, and I know the county probably is not in a position to take over that as far as funding because of that pedestrian path that's being included in that some people wanted to be included in that. So, who can fit the bill with this?
well, I think for right now, it's just going to be the roadway. I think there
Mm,
there was sort of a general acknowledgement that we didn't want to hold up the traffic
sure,
congestion part of it
sure.
over this secondary debate. And so, I hope that there's a path forward for a path, right? So I,
Mm,
I do hope that down the road, maybe that can be an amenity that's added or planned for. But I think right now the priority is to get the road congestion
right,
project going.
going. And without the pedestrian path, how long would that take for this to happen? I know that's a redundant question.
Yeah. So, you always ask the hard questions, Quentin. I don't know. I don't know. I know that at one point it was out for bid. The bid may have been awarded. I don't remember the exact deadline on the
Sure.
bid, but my understanding was that they were very close to awarding that contract. No, that's not true. They have awarded the contract. They did award the contract. I remember now that they did that. So at this point, I guess it'll be more of a, getting started. I think they did the official sort of groundbreaking,
Right.
and then the construction crews will start to come in. But I think construction on these kinds of projects takes forever, because you don't want to make existing traffic worse. So you try to prioritize night work and,
Sure.
um, you know, uh, slow and steady, I guess. But I know people have been frustrated. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear about it all the time on social media. But going back to Central Park Road, as far as obviously the issues with the wetlands, have they been able to do an environmental study?
Yeah, so that was a
Oh,
big, big part of the requirement was an environmental impact
mm,
study.
mm,
And so, we, you know, there's a requirement to mitigate any impact. And so, yeah, that's a huge part of why the permitting takes so long is
mm,
because of that environmental impact study. And no one's suggesting that we shouldn't do it, but it's just a reality of building road projects in such environmentally sensitive areas is that they just do take longer to get designed and permitted.
And I know you talked obviously about the road lifting in that area. So how long does that take?
So that project is a little bit smaller in scope once it gets
Mm,
designed. So, it's a smaller stretch of road. There are alternate routes for cars if they did have to close a lane.
mm.
So it's just that project should be a faster construction time than the main. Think about how big of a project that main flyover is. You're talking building elevated roadways in a already congested intersection. Fortunately, Central Park can be designed in a way that can be built a lot more quickly.
Wow, that's really good to hear. And I know you talked earlier, obviously, about some of those failing septic tanks that we all know about on James Island. Do we have an estimate of how many of those are?
So the current project is going to replace over 100 septic tanks, connecting those to sewer.
Yes.
There were a number of homeowners, I think between 20 and 25 homeowners, on the other side of Folly Road that did not participate, and that were not and that were not within the town of James Island, which has a mandatory forced connection ordinance. And
Mm.
so, unfortunately, they chose not to participate. I think that has long-ranging impacts on the health of the creek. But again, you know, we didn't want to hold up the entire project waiting on those 20 homes. And so the decision was made by the Public Service District, James Island Public Service District, to move forward with the nearly 100 homes that will connect. And so that's what we're starting with. And then from there, they'll, as funding permits, they'll move into other areas as well.
And speaking of funding, I want to go back to what you said earlier, because obviously, when you get back to Columbia next week, you want to tackle issues such as infrastructure and human trafficking, which I hope to talk to you in depth in a few seconds. But I know that you want to request funding for DOT. So, how much money do they actually need right now?
I mean, I wish I could give you a number.
Oh,
It's billions. I mean,
okay.
I don't think, I
Yes, ma'am.
think it's two different questions, right?
Mm,
So the first is how much do they need? The answer is an unlimited amount, right? We could probably sink $4 to $5 billion into our roads and still not be completely caught up from all the deferred maintenance and issues that we have and the congestion we have, right? I mean, you could put 10 billion in it and probably not be caught up. But the real answer is how many projects can we do per year, right? Like how
mm.
much capacity does the paving industry, the design industry, DOT itself in terms of staffing. And so I think that is the more pressing question. And that's where, maybe it'll be a billion, right? But I think you have to sort of look at how much we can put in it per year, and actually build projects with, right? And so the gas tax, 2024 was the very first year that it was fully implemented. So that full 32.6 cents, I can't remember.
Right.
Sorry, you're the numbers person, Quintin. I don't know. I went to law school. Okay.
Right.
But no. So, that's been fully phased in now. So if you think about it, I mean, even though we did that increase to the gas tax, it got phased in over time. And so 2024 was actually the very first year that DOT actually had the full amount to work with. And then from there, of course, all the other funding sources are what we look at in the budget, right? So Ways and Means is busily working right now up in Columbia before session even starts.
Oh,
Ways and Means is, of course, what we call on the House side, the Finance Committee, on the
okay.
Senate. I know you know this, but for your listeners, the Senate side is called Finance, and in the House we call it Ways and Means. And so the Ways and Means Committee is actually already busily working. Right now they are already meeting, and they have been for a while. So, we look at the budget writers. They'll get new revenue numbers. You probably saw in the news that we get the report on that $1.8 billion on January 15th. So we'll know. It's certainly possible that some of that money has actually already been allocated and just wasn't spent, right? So we can't just, it may not be a $1.8 billion surplus, right? It may very well be that $1 billion of that was actually allocated towards a number of capital projects. We just don't know, right? Unfortunately, the accounting just wasn't there. And obviously there have been consequences for that, and we've been really disappointed in the way that was handled. But at the end of the day, this report is what matters. And so we'll find out how much that actually is available. And then I think the budget writers can take that into account, hopefully when looking at funding. Now, don't get me wrong, infrastructure is not the only priority, right? Our budget writers are going to be looking at everything from conditions at juvenile justice center to the hospitals, right? To roads. So, DSS and Department of Mental Health, right? So, I mean, for the budget, that it's not like you can just take that 1 billion and say, hey, we're going to put it straight into roads. It's going to have to be, as South Carolina grows, the needs of its citizens grows as well.
How do you grow South Carolina with smart growth?
Well, that is a great question, and I think that leads perfectly into the bill that I'm working on right now. Good cue. But so, I've been working on a bill that allows local governments to put in place a capital plan, and then to work with developers to say, hey, this is the level of service that we believe we need for water, roads, sewer, schools, whatever infrastructure they prioritize in that area. And so this is this is your proportionate contribution. And in that way, I hope that we get ahead of the infrastructure needs. Right now, we're sort of building scared, right? We did all this economic development work, which is great. It has grown the economy. It's provided more jobs. It's mostly good. But when you have 500,000 people move into a state and everyone's going like this about whose responsibility it is to build the infrastructure, at some point you got to all come to the table and agree, this is what we need. We're going to build it before we build the houses or before we build the new factory, whatever it is. We sort of have to say, hey, this is what the infrastructure needs are to accommodate this level of growth, and let's do it first, or at least at the same time. So that's, my solution would be to ask I don't know what Calhoun County needs, right? I don't know what Horry County needs, but they do, right? So my solution would be to have each local government do a plan as a prerequisite to allowing this type of funding from private sources, and then allow them to say, hey, here's our local government share, here's the state share, or whatever, federal, whatever it's going to be. Here's how we plan to pay for our share. Developer, here's your share. And in that way, everybody comes to the table. They do this in Florida, Maryland, Washington State. So this is not a novel concept. I just think that we have to really redouble our commitment to the planning part of it first. Our local governments know what they need, and it's just a matter of reducing it down to a plan. A lot of them probably have one, and then taking that plan and determining how we're going to fund everything. And so that's what my bill would do. It would give them access to a whole bunch of new funding from private sources as part of the permitting process that they already do. And of course, it's like a carrot and a stick, right? In order to take advantage of that funding, they have to do the capital planning on the front end before the development comes.
And I want to ask you more about this in depth, but how many private sources would they be allowed to receive? Will there be a cap on that?
Well, that's a great question. So they would not be allowed to double dip. So for example, where they already charge an impact fee, you would have to count that towards that share, right? So you can't double dip in that way. And you also wouldn't be allowed to charge more than the proportionate share, right? So let's say I'm a home builder and I'm going to build 100 homes on a road that needs, I don't know, let's just for math's sake say $1 million worth of work. Well, there were already 1,000 cars on that road. So my 100, or excuse me, there were already 900 cars on that road. So my 100 is only 10% of the impact. So then you'd only be able to charge that developer 10% of the cost to improve that road. So that's sort of what I mean when I say a proportionate share. Now, I can't tell the local governments what the costs are, what the needs are, but the idea would be to incentivize them to do the kind of planning that needs to be done.
So with that particular plan, as far as that capital plan, would there be a time limit on how they should develop that?
Just that the funds wouldn't be available until they did the plan. So, I mean, presumably they would want to take advantage of this. And so, not everyone will, right? There's some counties that aren't experiencing that high growth pressure right now. And so maybe they wouldn't want to, or maybe they would only include schools or water. They don't have to include every type of infrastructure. They would just include what they need. And so when the need arises, the idea would be then they had to do the plan before they could start to require any funding as part of their permitting.
And I hate to be redundant with this question, but how soon should they? Well, if they have the plan in place, how soon should they submit it to the state legislature?
Well, so the idea would be that they don't have to submit it to us. It's just that once that plan is in place and they can determine let's call it 8 months to do the planning. Then right away, they have the authority to pass an ordinance that, they amend their permitting statute or whatever it is and say, hey, as part of your new building permit, you're going to have to address these proportionate impacts.
Impacts. And I want to go back because you touched on something very telling to me: deferred maintenance when it came to DOT. Where exactly is that happening in your district, and where do you need help with maintenance right now?
Everywhere. No, I mean, listen, as long as I've lived in South Carolina, which I think I'm a little older than you, but for the 40 plus years of my lifetime here in South Carolina, we have chronically underfunded our government. We have been obsessed with tax cuts and efficiency and doing more with less. Well, what that has meant is that you get what you pay for, right? We have not built sidewalks. We have not maintained Folly Road. My family calls it the roller coaster, right? When you're getting on the Ellis Creek Bridge,
Right.
the road sort of like goes up and then down,
Right.
like because it's splitting apart, right? Like
Yeah.
the entrance to the bridge. That's not even in the top 100 of problems that we're dealing with, right? So this is, this idea that there's a certain area, it's everywhere. All the roads, I think we're something like several when the state sends money every year to the county in the form of C funds, and I think Charleston County said something like 70 to 80% of the funds have to go just to repaving, just to try to get us out of the hole that we're in, right? So that doesn't even address new projects or congestion projects or pedestrian paths or drainage projects, right? That's just repaving existing roads. So we're in a hole, and I hope that we continue to commit resources to getting us to a point where we can move forward instead of just catching up.
Well, obviously that's part of the capital plan, but do you want that to be, well, as far as public-private partnerships, do you want that to be a part of that plan as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of that. Well, now let me say this: you would not be able to charge. In my bill, you would not be able to charge a developer for routine maintenance that you should have done before, right? That is not a capital project. That is maintenance. So you would only be able to charge for a proportional share of a capital project, right? A new project or an expanded impact because of the additional houses, factory, businesses, whatever. And so, the maintenance work has just got to be like just direct state and county funding. So that kind of has to happen separate and apart from this.
And let me ask you this: what is that existing infrastructure repair that would actually accelerate economic growth here in South Carolina and in District 115?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, having good roads and having good water and sewer, that's what businesses look for when they're talking about where to locate. When one of the biggest drivers for clean energy is actually Walmart because of their energy power needs, right? That's an infrastructure need. They're a big driver of widening I-26 because their trucks need it to get to the distribution center. So the businesses look at our infrastructure when they decide about expanding, relocating, all of those things. And not to mention their employees look at the communities where they would be living. So, the schools, the sidewalks, everything. So, at some point you can't just keep saying, hey, we're going to keep growing and growing and growing. You lose the sense of what made South Carolina so special in the first place.
Hmm. What is that one thing that could actually make 115 better so that South Carolina can be better tomorrow?
Gosh, the one thing. So, I mean, there isn't just one magic bullet, that, but I'm sure what you're asking me is sort of my priority or my top priority. I think for me, it's sort of twofold, but it's better mass transit, better like a better bus system that long range transportation. Excuse me. The regional transportation project that's going in, the rapid bus system. Right. But that's got to be coupled with better pedestrian access, right? So you can't just have that and then expect somebody to walk down a dirt rut on Folly Road to get to the bus stop, right? So we've got to have those two things. That's the only way we are going to, think about it. That goes from everything from employment to traffic congestion to environmental impacts. I mean, that is the key in my mind, is a better mass transit system that relies on a better pedestrian infrastructure. And that is the way we take cars off the road. That is the way we connect people to jobs. That is the way we grow. That's the way we do it without, overall increasing our environmental impacts as well. So in my mind, that's the number one key in terms of smart growth. Obviously, we're working on that with the existing LRTP, but there's so much more we can do.
And I'm sitting right behind it, right here on Rivers Avenue. And so it's going to be coming here soon. And I know all about taking the bus from on Farley
You
Road
know.
as well. Yeah.
Yep.
With
Yep.
this
Yeah.
bicycle here now. But
Yeah.
yes, ma'am. But would there be, what is the current funding for all of this right now? For your idea,
Yeah.
not
So,
just the rapid bus transportation system.
yeah, that's the problem, is that CART is woefully I mean, it goes back to the same problem that I talked about. We have been chronically underfunding our state government for decades. And so everything is just behind, right? CART is not funded well. And it's, of course, it's cyclical, right? When there isn't high ridership, there isn't money, you know what I mean? Like, so it's a definite chicken and egg problem. But I think what we have to do is demonstrate the success of the big project we're doing right now. We have to demonstrate the success of that project, both to the public and to the elected officials that make the funding decisions. And then use that as an example of how we can have a successful transit program. And then hopefully encourage both people and elected officials to come together and demand more mass transit and fund more mass transit. And so that's my hope, is that this is a successful project that people enjoy using, and that it provides a real service, and that we'll increase funding for it. But right now it just comes piecemeal, right? Grants here, a lot of grants went into that project. CARTA has a regular source of funding from the gas tax and from DOT, but we just have to. It's piecemeal right now, and so my hope is that we can sort of, if not a dedicated source of funding, at least a lot more funding. But it's hard to say that we need mass transit when we don't even have a road. A road, and some places don't even have a paved road, right? So it's like you're balancing all of that for sure.
Sure, and I want to get you back on in the spring for Quintin. Close to talk more about this in depth, but I know that you're something else that you're passionate about is stopping human trafficking, and
Yeah.
of course you are a former prosecutor, and
Mhm.
of course you're now a lawyer. What is that one indicator of human trafficking here in South Carolina?
I think that's a really interesting question, because there are data-driven methods. So we have a tri-county task force here in South Carolina. It's sort of a cooperative endeavor between the Charleston County and the SLED through the state. But our tri-county task force has really excelled in their work, and they have actually developed um, sort of data. They're in year 4 of testing out markers, I guess would be a good way to put it, but like certain factors that indicate a high risk of human trafficking. And they're applying that in our jails, and they're attempting to apply it in most of our hospitals. Some are doing it already, and some are working on it. But the idea is that if you can do 4 to 5 years of, that is now a data-backed test or marker for human trafficking, then that can be replicated in all the settings, right? So we can start testing for that in our hospitals and in our jails and everywhere, so that we have reliable markers for when someone may be a victim of human trafficking. Because it's not always, and I'm not an expert in the field, but it's not always what we think, right? I know that these folks have really honed in on some of the potential markers. And actually, one of the things I want to do with my bill is to require training of our medical professionals on these factors. Once they're developed, I want, it doesn't have to be long, right? A 1-hour training, 2-hour training, especially for maybe our nurses or the people who come into first contact with people or with patients, to say, hey, what are the questions we should be asking somebody that could potentially be a victim of human trafficking? Because there is what I described, sort of this data science-backed set of questions. And all we need to really do, not all we need to do, but the next step there is to get that into the field. But you've got to train the medical professionals on sort of what those factors are and how to handle that sort of situation, right? What the complexities are of dealing with a potential victim of human trafficking. So I think that's the next step in the fight. Everybody's doing some incredible work. There's a lot of awareness around this right now. But me personally, I've been coordinating with our Tri-County task force here, who does such an amazing job. From everything from our SANE nurses, which are the nurses at MUSC who look at victims of sexual abuse, to our jails, and so we're already starting a lot of the amazing work. And I'm just one person late to the game, trying to help what they're already doing. But my goal is that maybe we can start the conversation around that required training for our medical professionals.
And speaking of those medical professionals, who else should be able, in your opinion, being based off your experience as a criminal prosecutor, should have this particular training?
The other big place that we can identify people are in the jails. Unfortunately, victims will get arrested for prostitution, and so that's a lot of times the first place that we come in contact with a victim is through an arrest for prostitution. And so knowing sort of what to look for there. Last year, Senator Katrina Shealy spearheaded a great bill that allowed women and men, it can be men as well, but allowed immunity from or the ability to get immunity from a prostitution charge, because a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times that is an indicator of human trafficking. And so trying to make sure that we're treating the people who are charged with this offense, making sure that we understand when it is the result of human trafficking and how we can more appropriately deal with that than the criminal justice system.
And how many of those people have been, for lack of a better word, excluded from that particular charge here in the Low Country?
Well, so the bill just went into effect.
Okay.
We don't have numbers yet,
Okay.
but my hope is that we will see that over time, and hopefully we'll see, our jails and our solicitors' offices and a lot of times that's a local charge too. So we may not ever really aggregate numbers about it, but yeah. So now we're just now in the early stages of it. So I guess hopefully, knock on wood, that will lead to some ability to better deal with these folks who have been these victims.
And speaking of over time and time, and I know you have to run, but where do you see the trend of human trafficking occurring here in the Low Country?
It's so hard to say. For a long time, the initial thought was that it was happening in our interstate corridors, right? So along I-95, along I-26. But unfortunately, it's become such a pervasive problem that it's everywhere. I don't think people realize it, but it is in our communities. It's happening, and so everyone really, that there are hotlines. They've done a lot of the SLED and these task forces have done an excellent job of putting hotlines in a lot of bathrooms and rest stops and things like that. And so I think it's sort of similar to the old, after 9/11, we used to say, if you see something, say something, right? It's the same thing with this. I hope people will sort of just be aware that it could be anywhere in your community. And so if something doesn't seem right, or if someone in the bathroom doesn't, if you're in the bathroom and something doesn't seem right, or somebody seems fearful, ask them if they're safe, or ask them if they're okay, or if they need help. Don't be afraid to use the hotlines to report something. The people on the other end of the hotlines are trained in knowing how to handle these types of situations. So I just encourage people to keep their eyes open. Unfortunately, I think it's one of the next major challenges that we have to face together.
State Representative Spencer Wetmore, thank you so much for your time. And again, come back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. Always a pleasure.
Likewise.